Beginning. Great. Welcome everyone. My name is Alyssa Best. I'm a career advisor in the Career Center. I am where I work with students and alumni, and in the student population, I primarily serve the College of Arts and Sciences and School of Education population, and with my alumni, I work across um, most of the schools at AU. So I'm excited to be with you all today, talking about one of my very favorite topics, which is networking and informational interviewing. And the way this is going to work, I have some tips and a slide deck to walk you through, and I also have some interactive components as well. So that will be, something I will share in a few minutes and give you a chance to practice and play around. At any point, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to put something into the chat, and we'll take it from there. So let's see a moment here. Okay. Um, I'm going to give you kind of our agenda today, an overview of our Career Foundation series, which is something new that we're doing this semester. And then we're going to roughly divide up our time with networking and then informational interviewing. The activity, it says it's at the end, but we're actually going to kind of do it in part one and part two. And I'll leave time for questions, but as I mentioned, feel free to jump in with any questions as well. So our Career Foundations events are a series of workshops and presentations designed to help you build the essential skills that you need for any career path. Each session focuses on key areas of career and professional development. Feel free to attend one or attend all. We have the other topics recorded as well. So the personal branding and search strategies. I did that, led one of those recently. We have one of resumes and cover letters and interviewing and professional and workplace etiquette. But today we're focusing on networking and informational interviewing. Why this topic? Why focus on this? Networking helps you meet people. Informational interviews help you learn from them. Both open doors to opportunities that you may not have found, that you may not find on your own. Conversations with professionals give real-world insight and advice, and asking questions and building relationships strengthens your career path. I liken it to your career detective, and when you go and talk to people, you're gathering clues about their background, how they got to where they are, their field, where they're going in the future, what trends they're seeing, what entry points you might be able to access as wherever you might be, whether you're a graduating senior, recent graduate, a grad student, further an alum, further in their career path. It's you know, depending on where you are, this gives you some really good information about whether or not also it's a fit for you. Sometimes you might have an informational interview and realize this actually is not, this type of role or company is not a fit for me. And that's good information. And that's an excellent clue as well, because then it helps direct your next step. I mentioned how kind of the breakdown of how we'll divide up our time. Are there any questions before we get started?
Can I just a quick question?
Sure.
You mentioned that there are recordings for the previous sessions,
Mm-hmm.
correct? Are
Yes.
those available? Are those available on the on Handshake?
They are available on the Career Center, our YouTube channel. So I will make sure
Okay,
to flag me if I forget, but I'd say hold me to account. I will make sure to put
mhm.
that into our chat.
Great. Thank you so much.
Question. Yeah. It's an excellent question. Good. All right. And then, oops, hold on a second. I'm just going to, there we go. I was just adjusting my Zoom settings so I can see a little bit more of the screen here. So I like to start with and demystifying what we mean by networking. Sometimes I think this term, especially in DC, it can bring up feelings of sometimes like what can you do for me, or like kind of like a transactional type of nature, inauthentic. Sometimes people will indicate that as well. I don't think it has to speak to any of those kind of experiences. I think that it really can be co-opted in a much more helpful way. So the purpose of networking is to build meaningful relationships with people in careers, in fields, and organizations that interest you. So I think of it like making professional friendships, if you will. So finding people with similar interests, so, commonalities and getting to know them just as you would if, when you're on campus, you're, trying to make friends, join clubs, you look for people who have similar interests, you go to events, right? And I think so for those who are, currently students, you're already practicing networking, even if you didn't realize it. So it's, in your classes, for example, when talk to other students, like I had a student, mention something like they were taking I think it was taking like a class with a law. I think it was like a justice and law class, and that they're planning to take this with this particular professor next semester. And another student popped up and said, "Oh, I took that class last semester. That professor's really great. You're gonna enjoy it." And I was like, "That's great." So that's an example of networking where people are exchanging and trading information. So it's something you might be doing with other students, and then also in building relationships with people in careers, and also with your with faculty too. That's a form of networking. So with the second column, it involves making connections, maintaining relationships with people who support you throughout each phase of your career development. Faculty are great for this. I work a lot with alumni, well, not just alumni, with graduating students as well who are applying to graduate school, and a lot of them are reaching back out to alumni, or excuse me, reaching back out to faculty rather, previous professors they've had, asking for letters of recommendation. So that might be another phase of someone's career professional development that a contact might help you with, like graduate school. Your network of contacts may help you to choose the right career. They may help to find rewarding opportunities to develop your skills and to achieve your goals. Here are some secrets of successful networking. Starting a conversation, preparing an elevator speech to introduce yourself. Why it's called elevator speech is the idea is it's something that you can, a quick introduction as if you're riding in the elevator with someone. Um, Confidence, that's something that I think takes time to develop. That's the more that you practice this, like with any skill, that you try it out and you expose yourself to it, then the more confidence you build, and then the more confidence that you'll gain as well. So I think with the comment here, act with confidence, even if you feel shy or intimidated, it might kind of speak to like fake it till you make it type of attitude. But knowing that it also can take time to get to that feeling of confidence. Um, Let me just pick up a few things. Tracking. Sometimes students will show me a way that they maintain a spreadsheet with different people they talk to, who they like, what clues, as I mentioned, they or takeaways that they gain from that conversation, and any follow-up activities like a referral or anything that person may have suggested. The And thinking about one of the things that often comes up is students will say, or individuals will say, the idea of networking stresses me out. I'm introverted, and I think that there are definitely ways to manage that. The Being introverted primarily means that you recharge with time by yourself, versus extroverts are recharge being with others. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're reserved or outgoing. It just means that you may need to create a buffer of time before or after the event, sometimes even during the event, to make sure you can, kind of, if you're feeling drained by going to a social event, taking a little bit of a breather. I think recognizing that, other people can be reserved as well. Sometimes, when you're meeting with employers, they also might be feeling a little bit awkward as well, or they might be a bit more reserved or get kind of easily drained by social interaction. So sometimes that you find other people who have some similar traits as well. Um, I think also it can be helpful if to for anyone, whether you're an extroverted or introverted, to take notes on the conversation afterwards. Not necessarily during when you're like if you're at a networking reception, you don't necessarily need to walk around with a you know with a pad and paper, but it's unless that's your style, that's totally appropriate to do that. I'm a big note taker for sure, but to try to capture takeaways, as soon as you can before they float away. So in getting started, one thing is to not overlook people in your personal network. I often will ask individuals, so how did you hear about your internship or how did you find the job that you have right now? In many cases, it's through a friend, a roommate's parent, a family member, a neighbor, a family friend, a cousin, right? There's a lot of people in our immediate network. They know you, they know what you're into, they know the kinds of things that you're looking for, or you may feel just more ease in talking to them because they're familiar. These people also may be great at introducing you to someone else that they know that could be a good fit. Maybe they're not in the career or industry that you're interested in, but maybe they have someone else that they could point you to. Which is kind of as I said, they're familiar to you. Hopefully, you're familiar to them. Make your passions and goals known to your peers, relatives, and professors, and ask for guidance or referrals. I was talking to a colleague of mine, a neighbor who is a professor, and she was saying, she said, she always invite students to talk to her about career advice. She said, I see that as a key part of my role as a faculty member and guiding students in their career and professional development. So I always like to remind you all to, whether you're in class now or have been in the past, to remember to speak with your professors because they have a lot of great insights. They have connections. They know also what other students and alumni are up to. They know where other, students have had success at finding an internship or where people are getting hired. So they have a lot of great advice as well. I don't think I thought to do that when I was an undergraduate student. I thought of my professors as like scholars and experts in, like I was an English major, so it'd be like this person is like British literature. This person is, modern, contemporary poetry, right? And that I kind of thought of them in these silos, like around just the expertise that they brought or the topics that they taught, and didn't necessarily think of them as much for career advice. The one exception to this was a journalism professor I had, and I was talking to him about my interest in potentially pursuing journalism, which I did not end up doing, but that one of the things that he was giving me advice about, like whether I should go to graduate school or in the sequencing of things. Basically, his advice was to, for me to work if I wanted to work in journalism to find a job in a media outlet. But he also thought I might be interested in advocacy work. So that was a really good conversation. And as someone who's a practitioner in the field, maybe I saw him in a different lens in that way. So that was a really helpful conversation that kind of steered me in a different direction. Using online resources, LinkedIn, we have a whole other separate Career Foundations event on LinkedIn. There's also a tool called Alumni Fire, which specifically helps students connect with AU alumni. I can mention that a little bit more as well. Joining on-campus and professional associations. There are, like, I know there's if there are any School of Communication students or studying public relations, for example, there's the Public Relations Student Society, and there's also, I know, like a pre-law society and other types of professional groups, as well as, of course, on-campus groups that have like a student chapter, taking advantage of leadership opportunities, attending events, seminars, classes or conferences. There's, I know the student research, the Matthias Student Research Conference. I've had students I've seen on from their resumes that they've had the chance to present their research. That's such a great professional development opportunity. Great thing to be able to put on your resume. Great way to, to share what you're studying as well as practicing public speaking. And then finally we have, actually, I'm not sure if it's finally, we may have one more in the, yeah, we do have more. Um, the attending our events. We have a ton of events that we run throughout the academic year in particular, some in the summer, but mostly in the academic year, including employer panels, networking receptions. We have a virtual job and internship fair coming up on Wednesday, December 3rd from 12 to 3. More information is available on Handshake. You can see the list of employers who are coming. We've sometimes also will partner with employers to do a site visit. Um, to I remember in the spring, I got to join students to go on a tour of the U.S. Capitol, and it was an opportunity to learn more about legislative opportunities to work in the legislative branch, and that was just really, really special. So that was something that we had promoted, through our, also we send out a newsletter every Monday that gives kind of a roundup of opportunities that week and what's coming up. So either by checking out what we have in Handshake or reviewing the newsletter that our office sends you, it can be a great way to hear about what's going on. As well as talking with, also I know faculty members sometimes will sit, like that we had a French and Spanish language arts fair, career fair earlier in the semester, and I talked to some students who said, "Oh, my faculty member, my instructor, my professor encouraged me to attend. I'm getting extra credit for coming." In one case, I saw like a whole group of people coming in because I think that they were attending that in lieu of going to class. So sometimes your professors, once again, bringing it back to those wonderful folks in your life, will have good information about and referrals to networking events as well. Staying in touch, we could talk a little bit more about that, what maintaining relationships could look like. All right, so let me stop there and share before we get into informational interviewing. I want to share we have a handout. Give me one moment. I'm going to exit out of this and put that into into our chat. Let's see. Actually, give me one moment I think that it is, let me just save it. Let me give you a quick brain break as I get this set up. I'm realizing the link is just it's sending it as like a long SharePoint. So let me take a moment to download this as a PDF so that'll make it easier. Well, take a moment just to think if there's any questions that you have. Try to get this into the chat. Okay, here it comes. I don't see any questions in the chat. Great. And then I just wanted to show, I'll do a screen share as well. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on the first page before we pivot back over to the second topic of informational interviewing. So with staying on the networking topic, I know this is a PDF and it's not something where you can type into it as easily unless you have there is a draw button at the top of depending on what kind of PDF reader that you have, Adobe Reader, you might be able to type or add some text box. So if this might be something you may want to take some notes on the side. Uh, but to imagine who is already in your network. I'm going to give you all a moment to list 3 people that you already know who could help you explore careers. And actually, while you're thinking of it, I invite you to put into the chat, right into the chat, one of those individuals or type of individual. It could be like, it could be like political science professor, or it could be the name, specifically the name of someone.
I'm sorry, do you want us to write it on our sheet or in the chat?
Um, the Good question. Yeah, I'm so sorry if that was my instructions were muddled. I'd love for you to either write in the sheet or on your own, in typing in your notes or writing on a piece of paper, your 3 people that you may want to contact, but to pick one of those people that you'd like to share in the chat, maybe just to kind of get some brainstorming going, especially if anyone's a little bit stuck on who they might would want to speak to.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. This is around alumni exploration. Let me share Alumni Fire, the link for that. And give me one moment. Here we go, putting that into the chat. I can kind of briefly log in and show you what that looks like. Give me one second here. Um, it is like LinkedIn in that it is a virtual networking platform, but it's different in that it is where it's more of a warm connection where people are intentionally showing up saying, I want to be I want to be contacted. I want to be helpful. I want to be available for career chat or job shout out, that kind of thing. So it can depend on sort of what they might offer. But let me just log in and show you all what that looks like. If you For anyone who may want to log in now, you have to go through there might be like a 1 to 2 day delay because we have some moderators that just make sure that your AU students or alumni. So it's a little delayed gratification there. So I want to show you what that looks like here. So we have some different chapter information, but if you, for example, let's see, search. Say you wanted to find other literature students in the Washington, D.C. area. You can go to education history, the field of study, and we could add a location. We could put the districts. Okay. Actually, it's probably, yeah, Washington it's probably the state, not, okay, so here we go. And then let me search. And sometimes you might find, like we have Sophia, is a current student. You might find other students on here as well. But we can see this person says as a recent grad in publishing. See once. Okay, let me look for someone who has what's called quote unquote services. There's not a fee involved, but that's what they call the like kind of what they're available to help with. Let's see, give me a moment to find. Okay, here we go. Megan offers one service. What she offers is introductions and networking. So here's someone who's studied public relations and communications, graduated in 2020. The offer, educate an introduction and networking. And if you want to know, you can message this person through this site or through by clicking here. There's different components, but essentially this goes through the email messaging platform. You don't have to log back into Alumni Fire every time you want to use this tool. So that's just a couple of ways to interact with that particular tool. And then on the back to the, let me go back to our handout. The very bottom, there's of the first page is a sample message for reaching out to the connection. So I know that can sometimes trip people up as well. Like what? Okay, so I found someone I want to reach out to. What do I say? So we try to make it easier by creating a sample message. Hi, so and so. I'm a senior studying literature at American University. Notice we share an AU connection. That's got maybe more for a LinkedIn type of connection. Obviously, if you're contacting them through Alumni Fire, that's dedicated to AU students and alumni, so you can modify that piece. I'm very interested in publishing, and your work with whatever it may be caught my attention. I'd love to hear more about your experiences, any advice you might have for someone just starting out in this field. Would you be open to a quick 20-minute virtual chat sometime in the next few weeks? Thanks so much for your time and consideration. And if we have time, we can come back and maybe have you all write a different version if you like, but I just wanted to give an example of what the components are. You can keep it short, you can keep it to the point. It's about sort of trying to move it to some type, like kind of what you're asking for, which is either, a quick call, a video chat, or if they're local to, to the area, or if you're going back if you're going back home for winter break, if you're not from the DC area and there's someone in your hometown community that you want to reach out to, that can be also another great thing to be thinking about now, like who you would want to reach out to get on their calendar over the winter break. Any questions so far before we switch to the second topic of how to actually conduct it? So you've hopefully gotten the person to say yes, and it's like next, like what's next? How do we actually conduct this conversation, conduct this meeting? Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Sure.
So, when you're leveraging your existing contacts and you're sending them your resume, I currently am doing that with somebody. And would it be too forward to ask them if, they have any opportunities available in their company? And I don't know where the line is really. Um, because they're just at this point they're just trying to talk more about what their job is like and what is a day-to-day look like in their in what they do. So I don't know if that is too forward of a question to ask.
I think that's a perfect segue into this next bit, which is there's a slightly different way that I would recommend handling that, which is essentially boils down to first ask them for their story, not ask them for the job. So framing it more like, I want to get to know you, and you're kind of like what that example script is. It didn't mention anything in that message about do you have any openings right now? Do you have a vacancy? Are you hiring? Right? It's more, excuse me, I want to get to know you and and hearing about your story and what it's like working in your field or working at your company. Now, during that conversation, it's not as if you have to act as if you're not interested. I mean, the point is like is to feel out. Does this feel like a fit for you? Do you see yourself in this role in this company? And if the answer is feeling yes, if you're building enthusiasm for what the person's doing, then you can certainly move into towards the end of the conversation. This sounds really interesting. I think I'm, confirming I am really interested in publishing. I'm just kind of going back to that example, and that I'm really interested in publishing and working at HarperCollins. Sounds like it would be amazing. What might be a good entry point, for, like for students who might be like sophomores and juniors? Would that, for example, it could be, would that be getting into, is it common for people to start by getting an internship with your company, or is there a different path that people sometimes take after graduation? Or if you're approaching graduation or have already graduated, then you could always ask, depending on where you are, if you're entry level, mid level, senior level. What are some entry points? That might be sort of a open-ended question. It's not necessarily saying, are you hiring right now? But I think it will give you good information about that. Hopefully, you've also taken some time to look at their website in advance, and so you will see if they have any posted jobs that interest you. If so, you can absolutely ask about that. So it's not like you're keeping your desire to work there hidden from them, but it's more about, let me build a relationship with you and kind of organically move the conversation to evolve so I can to hear more about, are there opportunities there, versus leading with that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm gonna tease that out a little bit. It was as if you were planted in the crowd alley. So thank you for that. Let me get back to my there we go. Let me get back to my, just doing a screen share presentation. Okay, perfect. All right, so keep an eye on time. Good. We're sort of roughly at that little over the halfway point, so this is good. Part 2, informational interviewing. Why do it? Hopefully this kind of syncs up to what we talked about at the beginning. It builds your connections. It helps you discover what skills and experiences are needed to succeed in a specific job. And you get perspective from people who are actually doing those jobs. So once again, to either confirm or, I don't want to say deny your interest, but to either solidify or to maybe redirect you based on what you're learning. Sometimes a job or company can sound really cool on paper, and then when you learn more, you realize um, it might not be exactly what you imagine, right? That's what's so valuable about getting these first person perspectives. I know I've had a number of students tell me that they like to watch either YouTubers or people on social media who are post videos about kind of like a day in the life of um, an investment banker or whatever it may be, right? You get people who kind of give you that first person POV. If those are tools that are helpful to you all, I'd love to hear more about that. So it's sort of like it's like the live version of that, where you get to talk, directly to that individual and, and tailor the conversation based around what you're most interested to learn as well. And then finally equips you to better target positions and market yourself, because as you learn more about what different positions are and what skills are involved, I know you all are multifaceted, you all have many strengths, many skill sets, and so it allows you to kind of curate what information may be most relevant to the hiring manager, to that employer. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this already. Alumni Fire, LinkedIn. I will come back to this in a moment, but I like to always show, many of you may be on LinkedIn. You may be somewhat feel probably different. It's probably a spectrum of how comfortable folks are with LinkedIn. I do want to show one cool little trick about LinkedIn that not everyone knows, which is how to find alumni. Actually, let me take a moment to do that right now so I don't lose track of that. Let me just let me deviate from the PowerPoint for a moment. So when you go to when you log into LinkedIn, and you can either search up here for, or you could go through your profile and you click on AU's landing page. It's a little bit of a kind of a side door, so it's not as obvious as quote unquote the front door to using LinkedIn. But if you click here on this tab on alumni, this allows you to do keyword searches based on, like, I could do a search publishing. A lot of people, and a lot of people think publishing New York City, but what does publishing, people who work in publishing in Washington, D.C. actually look like? You can see where they work. Some of them are National Geographic, some are at other institutions. The U.S. Government Publishing Office, I don't actually, I'm learning something new as I'm having an aha moment. I don't know what that is. I haven't heard of that. So that's really cool. So let's click on that. Let's go down. So I just clicked on the U.S. Government Publishing Office, and then you can see these are all AU, either AU, people who graduated from AU or who attended AU. It counts as alumni. LinkedIn counts as alumni. Anyone who has AU is in their education. So sometimes it may be someone who came here and transferred to another school, didn't graduate from AU, or who did like a semester abroad or semester, the Washington semester program, and spent a semester here. That still qualifies as someone you can absolutely connect with. It's, it may be that they only were here for a semester, but still had have a positive, feeling about AU, and therefore would like to still support other AU students and alumni. So I'm just going to click on this person. I see Hugh's title, Director of Government Publishing Office, former senior leadership and committee staffer in the U.S. House of Representatives. And then if you're curious, like, what is this? You could go straight to the company. Actually, hold on, let me back up. What I want to do is go straight to here it is. That took me down into when I clicked on that link, it kind of served as like a thumbnail, brought me to his profile. What I wanted to look for was this company page, the Government Publishing Office. Very interesting. Okay. So you get to learn more. So there's a lot of, I mentioned earlier, being a career detective, there's a lot of great information, a lot of good sleuthing that you can do on LinkedIn and Alumni Fire. This is, yeah, okay. So this used to be the Government Printing Office. Gotcha. Okay, that I've heard of. Okay, so then it was rebranded as from the printing office to the publishing office. This is something really interesting. This is not the kind of thing that often when we think about publishing, a lot of individuals might think of, like nonfiction or fiction book publishing, this kind, sort of the New York City publishers. So this can give you a lot of really interesting um, insights and clues about companies that you might be interested in. You can also do a career deconstruction of this person's profile. So even without even contacting Hugh, we can go and scroll through and see, okay, Hugh graduated, did a bachelor's, master's degree, a combination program, political science, and then went to law school at George Mason. And then you can click on the show all of 7 experiences and see kind of a fuller picture of this person's background. So it's as if you can, you're getting you're seeing a version of their resume. They might not have everything included. They might have more things included on their LinkedIn profile than they have on their resume. So sometimes people treat their LinkedIn profiles as more of a replica and of what's on the resume. Sometimes people, opt to make it shorter or longer depending on what they're trying to promote about themselves. So I have a lot of fun with LinkedIn. Always happy to do more of a deep dive on that with anyone But I'll keep it brief and just in showing like that can be a really cool way to find alumni. The other option, of course, is if you were to click on a company that interests you, like Deloitte, it will then show up. It will then reveal, you know, 50 people from your school were hired here or something, whatever it may be. I know a lot of AU alumni work at Deloitte, so that's popped up that number. But that will then allow you to sift that way. So that's if you go through the company page, but this is more if you want to look based on industry or location or a keyword or a job title like data scientist. You can do a search for that as well. I think like the example that I shared earlier of the sample script and the handout that I shared with everyone. And let me actually take a moment too, because I think that we may have had, let me just share that again in case anyone came later and didn't get get the previous messages. Okay, put that handout again. Who you are, how you obtain their information. If you're contacting them on LinkedIn, for example, you don't need to say I found you on LinkedIn. That's obvious. But if I think that how you obtain their information would be more if you were to send an email, for example, why you're reaching out, what you want. Let me back up for a moment before getting into the prepare. Let me throw it open to you all on the call. Have any of you conducted an informational interview or simply put a career chat? Basically, you're interviewing the other person versus it being a job interview where they're interviewing you. If you have conducted one before, please feel free to raise a hand or put into the chat. Okay. I always like to check because I like to treat this I always like to treat my workshops as a way to kind of crowdsource information. So it's I like to hear from you all in the trenches who are conducting these, who are job searching, internship searching, networking, hearing what's working, what's not working, what your experiences are. So I always like to first draw on any previous experience someone may have had. So either you all are new to this, which is great that you're here and we're talking through this, or someone's feeling shy and about sharing something that a conversation they've had in the past. So in terms of preparing for the conversation, oops, okay, so what's my goal? I think hopefully if you treat it like being a career detective, gaining clues, gaining insights, figuring out, is this a field or role I can see myself in? Does this align with my values and goals and share my career goals? So the goal might be, does this align with my longer term career goals, right? What's my story that gets into who am I? Kind of answering that question. Tell me about yourself. This conversation is not a job interview. However, it is good to get to be prepared for answering questions like, tell me about yourself, or why are you interested in this in my field or in this the type of work I'm doing. The person who's taking time to meet with you, they are also curious about you. Yes, people love to talk about themselves, but they're wanting to invest in you and get to know you. And so having a little bit of, a little bit of prep on how you want to communicate, what you're into. It's also okay for the answer to the question of like, what are your career goals to be? I'm not sure. I want to go into this type of field, or this is an area of study that most interests me, but I'm not really sure what that's going to look like in terms of a job. That's one thing that I often hear that holds people back from doing these types of either one networking or doing informational interview, which is a component of networking. It's more of that one-on-one conversation versus say going to a networking reception or a career fair where you're potentially interacting with multiple people. But often I hear people say, it's I don't know. I'm not sure what I want. where I'm going, what my goals are. So I don't want to waste someone's time. And then often we'll say, well, that's also part of the purpose of this in terms of what's the goal is to gain information from the other person to then help you explore the career. It reminds me a little bit of when sometimes people will say something like, I don't like to do yoga because I'm not flexible enough. As a longtime yoga practitioner, this always like I'm always like, that's not the point. You don't, if there's no prereq to coming into doing yoga class. The point is that with time and practice, you become more flexible, you become more agile, you build strength, right? But it's not like you have to come in with that. So I think it's similar where, kind of like going to a yoga class, the only prereq might be to wear clothes that you feel like I'm not going to wear my jeans to go to a yoga class. So I'm going to aim to wear clothes that are comfortable. I may or may not need to bring a yoga mat depending on the studio space, and I may need to bring some water. Just kind of that's the preparation that I'm encouraging you all to take some light prep around thinking about how you want to describe a little bit about yourself. I don't want you to feel like when I'm suggesting what's my story, it's not like you need to have something very nuanced kind of figured out. What questions do you want to ask? This is really you're setting the agenda. What are you most curious to learn from that other person? Is it um, something about the company culture? Is it something about the modality? How does what does a typical day look like, a typical week look like? There's so many different questions depending on how much time that you have. If you have about 20 minutes, sometimes you might ask one question. You might have 5 questions prepared, but you might ask one question and that gets the person talking and they just go off and and then they go off into a lot of different tangents. So I think always having more questions is better than fewer, and then seeing how the conversation flows. And then in terms of what topics could come up in the conversation, it's also okay to chat about something personal. Like if you discover that that person um, has recently came back from a trip to Italy and you studied abroad in Rome, great. You can talk, that gives you something you can talk about. So you can, share something about your personal interests or hobbies. It doesn't have to be strictly career and professional. Open-ended questions are great. Go beyond, what do you do? This is going back to Allie's question. You're not leading with like, so how could I work here? How could I get hired here? However, at the end of the conversation, it is completely appropriate to say, like, this, I looked online, I didn't see any, or I saw this particular opening. Based on what I've shared about my skill set and interest, do you think that position would be a good fit for me? Or I didn't see any positions posted, but it sounds like this would be I'd love to work here. Yeah, I would be, delighted if you kept me in mind if something comes up that may be a good fit. Or could I circle back with you in a month or two just to check back in, right? So it's certainly you can express that you are interested, but it's not kind of leading with that as I said, it's asking for the story, not for the job as your kind of your first point of contact. Okay, here's some sample questions. And this, by the way, this presentation, I should have mentioned at the beginning, will be emailed to everyone. So I know I'm as a copious note taker, there's a lot of information here that I know you all won't have it. I haven't had a chance to probably take note of, so you will get this. Oh, this is the fourth question is a great one. What are your favorite and least favorite aspects of your job? What are some of the biggest challenges you face during your career? What recommendations might you have for me? Seeking common ground, as I mentioned, common interests. Yeah, don't be afraid to engage in non-career related topics. I'm going to give you all actually, before we get into I'm going to switch us back to the the handout. Let me go back. Let's spend a few minutes on page 2 before we wrap up. Let me see. Let me get back to my screen share here. So with the first question here, what would you ask in an informational interview? List Think about 3 to 5 questions that you want to ask someone in a role or industry that interests you. And while you are working on that, I'm working remotely today. I unfortunately hear my cat getting into something that I think he's not supposed to be getting to. So I'm going to let you think about that. I'll be back in just one moment. Give me 1 second here. I'm back. And indeed, he was trying to open a box of pastries this morning. So thankfully I got to the cardboard box and put it away before he got in there. So thank you all for staying. I know that could have been an opportunity for people to pop out. Would anyone like to share in the chat a question that we haven't touched on? I know that the questions that you might ask it's what I shared earlier. It's not exhaustive, but there's so many different questions that you might want to ask. Is anyone coming up with a really good question they'd like to share with the group? I see something in the chat. Let me see. Phil's saying, what skills or experience do you believe are most important to succeed in your field? Very good. Yeah, what skills or experience do you believe are most important to succeed in your field? Great. I encourage everyone to copy and paste that into their list. Excellent. Does anyone else have a question they would be most curious? As I said, there's no right or wrong question to ask. It's really about leading with your curiosity. What do you most want to learn? And setting, as I said, you're in control of the agenda. Oh, here's good. Okay, Ben saying, what advice would you give someone who is at the beginning of their career? Absolutely. I think that's such a great question. And with and thinking about people to talk to, you may want to talk to someone who is like 2 years out from graduation or someone in their mid-20s who can give insight about how they successfully made that transition from undergrad to being a working professional. You may want to talk to someone mid-level. You may want to talk to a director or a president or CEO of the company, right? So there's a lot of great insights and value you can get from people at all stages of their career path. And so I love this question. What advice? I mean, this is something I would love to kind of to chew on myself. Yeah, what advice I would give someone. Is there anybody else that you would recommend I speak to? Thank you so much. Yes, that's an excellent thank you for bringing that up because that's a great question to ask at the end of the interview. This is, you could say, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I've learned a lot. I'm, got a lot of great takeaways, or I'm planning to follow up on X, Y, and Z action steps you recommended. Uh, is there anyone else that you would recommend I speak to, or anyone you think, that would be helpful for me to chat with? And then you could also follow up with like, would you be willing to introduce us, or would you be willing to share their contact information? And then if there is someone that they recommend you speak to, after you've spoken to that person, circle back to person A and say, let them know what happened. For example, I have uh, recommended someone to, and then discovered that that person actually wasn't being very responsive to the people I put them in touch with. So I said, thank you. That sounds like that person doesn't have the capacity right now. So I might take them off my list, but I'll find someone else for you to chat with. Great. And then another great question. What resources have you found helpful at the start of your career? That's fantastic. Yeah. What resources have you found helpful at the start of your career? I'm gonna have to copy and paste these myself before I close out our meeting. Speaking of, I'm realizing we only have a couple minutes left. So let me, I know I haven't gotten through everything in the presentation, but you will get a copy of the slide deck as well as this handout. The last pieces of this worksheet are, after you talk to someone, what's one thing you can do to follow up? Send, like, for example, writing a thank you note, finding an article maybe that speaks to something that you discussed. If you're looking, if you are looking for a job and then find one, maybe thanks to something that they shared with you, send them a follow-up. And then there's some checklist here. How will you maintain your network? You've got some options like track in an Excel, Google Sheet, track in a Word doc. Actually, I would even add this something like create a LinkedIn account. Some of you might not have one. That's totally fine. Create an alumni fire account. And then as step 2, send messages. And then finally, what are your networking goals? Selecting 1 or 2 that you can realistically accomplish by the end of the semester, in the next few weeks. Those who are on the semester schedule, if we have an alumni, that, as a reminder, that's early to mid-December. Reaching out to 1 alum this week. Attending a career event like the job and internship fair virtual. I'll put that in the link. I'll put that in our chat. Messaging a professor or supervisor for advice, updating your LinkedIn profile. So let me leave you with, because I know otherwise Phil will remind me, 2 things. One is our YouTube channel with the other recordings.
I think I found it. If you'd like me to put it in the chat.
Oh, I think I found it right at the same time
Oh,
as
great.
you, Phil. There we go. Yeah, thank you. And then, yes, we have the other 3 topics listed there. We also have a bunch of good information on Handshake 101. Lots of content there. And then the other thing I wanted to do was to share information about our upcoming, one way you can practice networking is our upcoming virtual job and internship fair. More information is on Handshake, but let me put that event into put it in here. While I'm doing that, I know we want to be mindful of time, but are there any questions? I'm happy to hang on for a little bit. I'm almost to the event. Here we go. Got it. That is the Handshake sign up sheet. You can find we have 19 employers registered. We'll continue to have more that we're recruiting, so you can see who's already signed on. That's once again Wednesday, December 3rd from 12 to 3. And so that's a virtual. So we're doing something unique this semester. We offered an in-person version of our fair in September, and then we're doing a virtual version in in December. We had done virtual. We had to pivot to virtual during the earlier days of the pandemic, but this is the first time where we're doing two different modalities. So how it works with the virtual is that you can, what's super convenient, uh, in line with today's topic, is you can opt for a 10-minute one-on-one informational interview or chat. So you get to practice this in a really short 10 minutes. Hopefully doesn't feel too scary or too intimidating, especially like if the idea of a 20-minute conversation with someone is like, like the 10 minutes is a great way to practice and get started with this. The other option is some employers will have info sessions or group sessions, kind of like this, where someone will be presenting information and hopefully it'll be interactive. You can ask questions, that kind of thing. So those are the two. Some employers offer both. They do a group session and they offer 10-minute one-on-one slots for interviews, informational interviews. That is, they're not going to interview you for the job that you're just learning, or employer opportunity that you're just learning about on the spot. So informational interview, or sometimes they'll have one or the other. So that's a unique feature, unlike our in-person fair where you don't get a quiet, dedicated, like 10-minute chunk of time usually with employers because of the hustle and bustle and the nature of that type of expo. Let me make sure everyone has my email as well. It's abest, first initial, last name @american.edu. But before we wrap, are there any questions? You will get a copy of the handout and the slide deck. Well, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. And wishing you lots of fun with the informational interviewing. Keep me posted on how it goes. Happy to stay in touch and support you on this journey. Thank you all.